Dragons, Gazelles, and Unicorns podcast. I'm Rosemary Truman, founder and CEO of the Center for Advancing Innovation and founder and CEO of Ignite Social Impact. I'm here to welcome Alex from Vectorized onto the podcast. He has a really exciting startup journey he's going to be talking to us about today. So thank you so much, Alex, for joining.
Thanks for having me, Rosemary. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Beautiful day, it's Friday. My orchids are blooming. It's all fun. So I think our listeners would love to hear about your background and your journey.
Yeah, right on. So I've been in the startup space for about 12 years. So I actually dropped out of my graduate program. I was doing cryptography for a while, PhD in old school crypto. And then I went to work for a startup in New York. The startup was called Yieldmo. And the idea there was like, how can we compete with Google? And, you know, as a new grad working in tech, that was really exciting. I was like, oh, we get to compete from a technical level with Google. And that company did really well. We actually capture all of the top mobile traffic for New York Times, Forbes, MSNBC, Reuters, basically all the premium publishers for advertising. And that's really kind of how I got involved into the real-time and big data space. And I've been a technical founder my whole career. This is the first time I've been a CEO. Then I spent about three years there. I was the first engineer, help build out the whole technical team and the tech stack. After that, I went to start my own company called Concord, which we sold to Akamai in 2016. And the idea there was, how do we take these real-time streaming use cases for ad bidding, right? Like you want to do real-time ad bidding in like 20 milliseconds or 50 milliseconds. But give it to the world. And we ended up selling the technology and the company to Akamai in 2016. Vectorized is then the third one, which is throughout my tenure at Akamai, I really couldn't find a storage engine that could keep up with the volumes of data I was trying to push the hardware to. And it really sort of led me to question what was possible. And I think the takeaway was that sometimes when the road changes, you get to reinvent the wheel. And so it was a really fun realization in 2017 when I realized that the hardware is so much better today that I could do something at the software level that's so different from, you know, the last 10 years of how software has been built for this big data space. And you know, those are sort of the big strides or big steps in my startup journey.
So your current company is Vectorized.
Yeah.
So what can you give us an example of how it works, how the product
works? Yes, sure. So let me take one step back real quick and first frame the discussion on what Vectorized helps. We are it's a super technical product, but what it is that we help people deal with time-sensitive data. And so typical things are like your food delivery. So Uber Eats is a good example of where this technology can be applied. Credit card fraud detection is another good example. And so what Vectorized is a drop-in replacement for a technology called Kafka. So what happens in the space where Kafka lives is called event streaming. What an event is, just to contextualize the audience, is what happens to data when you contextualize it. That's what makes it an event. So an example is, let's say I want to buy this great t-shirt and I buy it from my computer. And so the contextualization on, let's say I buy it on target.com or whatever it is what IP, what credit card did I use, who's the person that bought it, what timestamp, what season it is the summer, is it winter. So when you contextualize data, that makes it an event. And the time-sensitive component is that when I buy a t-shirt online, I sort of expect my credit card to transact it in real time or reject it because it was fraudulent, right? If someone from, from a different part of the world, let's say in South Africa, is transacting this, and I don't happen to be in South Africa, then my credit card, I expect Visa to flag the transaction as fraudulent. And so what we do is we help companies to deal with this time-sensitive component at massive scale. And so our target audience would be people like, Uber Eats or Visa fraud detection. And these are just examples. Some of our real users are more in the oil and gas pipelines where they want to monitor all of these IoT devices and make sure that the oil and the pipeline is actually not jittering because it'll blow up and it's very sensitive. Some of our other customers are in the high frequency trading space where they need to do bank settlements in real time. But the general takeaway, and perhaps more applicable, is these two examples where I said fraud detection is an example that everyone is familiar with, as well as the Uber Eats, where you order the food and then you expect the chef to cook it in the next 10 minutes. And then you also want an update when the driver picks up the food and gets it to your home and so on. And so that's the space, and that's the technology that we built. And we compete in the market with a technology called Apache Kafka, which is really kind of synonymous with real-time streaming. It's so popular. And so, yeah, so we've been building this for about 2.5 years, and it's just been a wild ride.
Sounds like you have a lot of clients.
Yeah, so we've gotten really lucky in that so Kafka has been around for about 10 years, right? And it was built for hardware that was designed a decade ago. So hardware where, like, you remember your laptop that had a spinning disk and it sometimes would make a noise because it's just like getting slow. That was really the design space that the engineers back then designed Kafka for. But if you fast forward 10 years, computers are so capable and so fast right now that not only it gives us an opportunity to redesign the whole software stack, but also simplify things that would have been very difficult a decade ago. And so we got to learn from what they built, and is really sort of progressing the evolution of streaming. So the reason we were able to onboard some really big clients is that there's this real pain in the complexity of systems, and engineers in larger companies are really drowning with complexity. And so when we got to reimagine what was possible, a large part of the innovation budget was around making things simple for the user and giving them new primitives so that they can build their applications, faster and in a way that's much easier.
So you said that you named one of your competitors. So why you're better? Because they built their software on old technology, 10-year-old technology.
Yeah, good.
You simplified it.
Yeah, so we really bring up three things to our product and company. So the first one is to do real-time streaming, to give users that Uber Eats experience, or that credit card fraud detection experience, where as a consumer we demand these companies to have real-time systems, right? The transitive impact of you and I demanding that Visa or MasterCard or whatever have this fraud detection is that ultimately there has to be a software that processes that thing in real time. So what happened is the complexities of managing that system, that was really one problem. But once you pay for that complexity with expertise, or you offset that to a vendor, there's really two more problems. One was that the performance wasn't really what people were expecting out of the hardware. And part of my story being a principal engineer before I started this company is that I was able to take to Akamai is a content delivery network, perhaps the largest content delivery network in the world. So I was able to take two computers there and measure what can the hardware actually do, and then able to improve on the state of the art. And our latest benchmarks, for example, show an 107x performance improvement. So it's like, you go from a Toyota Corolla to a Ferrari. That's kind of the mental, the analogy I like to give people. So for some was about complexity, for others was about speed. So how fast can the thing go? And for others, like our hedge fund users, our cryptocurrency exchange users, our oil and gas pipeline users, was about data safety, so preventing data loss. And so the popular software that is currently doing real-time streaming made a particular set of trade-offs where 9 out of 10 customers that we interview that come from, that are using the competing product, run their systems in an unsafe fashion, which means they can experience data loss. And so anyway, so to sum it up, because I think we're getting too into the weeds of the product, I would say one was that you don't lose your data. Two, you kind of get upgraded from a Toyota Corolla to a Ferrari in terms of speed. And three is that we make it so easy that people are sort of tired of dealing with like non-essential complexity. I call that the accidental complexity of software.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned a couple of really good points when you were talking about how you're competitively better, and you mentioned you interviewed people. So how many potential clients did you interview before you decided this was the direction you're going to go?
Company building is really hard. When my previous company, though, we didn't. Concord was this real time, it was really all about the tech and we could do better. Before I started this company, I was like, we're not going to make the same mistake because you end up building something that does, it just needs a little bit more user input. So before I even wrote the first line of code, through sort of my network of my previous company, I got a chance to interview really the top, I don't know, like 50 to 75 companies that are sort of very modern in terms of their tech stack. So all my friends that, the usual, like all of the big companies, Facebook, Uber, etc., Lyft. And in addition to, I also interviewed the mid-market. So people who don't necessarily hire the most sophisticated software engineers, but have similar needs, right? Just because either you can afford it or you can hire fairly sophisticated people that are sort of at the edge of pushing what systems can do, it doesn't mean that your business doesn't need it. And so that was a critical component in finding need for the stuff that we were building. But yeah, we interview about before the first line of code, like 50 to 75 companies from all over, really, like small, medium, large public companies. And then so far we've now, in the last 2.5 years, probably hundreds of companies now. Definitely less than 1,000, but definitely in the many hundreds.
Wow, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I have to tell you a funny story though. I did my second thesis at Harvard. At Oxford. And the thesis was on caching software for the cloud. And I was so upset that I didn't patent it. And you actually it was like basically kind of found before Akamai. So it's very interesting. It's before Akamai, yeah.
That is wow. Yeah, it's now, literally it used to run something insane, like 70% of all of the internet traffic at some point ran through Akamai. Now it's much less because like video turns out to be the next, the most content heavy thing. And so Netflix is actually one of the biggest internet players in the world by volume traffic, not by type of traffic, by volume. They're the largest. So many hundreds of billions of dollars left on the table with that.
I know. I could have kicked myself. So how did you find the startup that you went to from quitting your grad school to New York City? Did they find you or did you find them?
Yeah. So I had done an internship at this financial company called FactSet, which is, so if you Google for any ticker, usually that information, or at least at some point, it used to come from a company called FactSet. They were one of the first, I think, if not the first company that automated listing an 8.5 by 11 fact sheet, just called FactSet, for investors to look at a company. So long story short, I went to work with them as an intern, and my manager there had left FactSet to go work for this guy named Mike Yavandidi in New York City, who had built and sold an ad tech company. And so Joe Laluz, who actually just sold his company to Coinbase in the cryptocurrency space, he's like, hey, come work with me. We're building this new team. Eventually, the initial social company that I was actually hired for folded 2 months after I joined. And I was like, well, what the hell am I doing here? I like dropped the grad school program and this isn't working out. Anyways, 2 months later, we started that company, and I was really, one of the few people left over from that transition. And so that's how I got started. And then it was really fascinating for me to be such an early employee for a company that had product market fit, because you see you just can't keep up with the features because of demand. And so at some point, our volume of traffic was doubling every month for like the first 24 months. And so we went from 1,000 impressions to 2,000. At the end of my time there, of the 3 years, we're doing like 4 billion impressions per day or something.
Wow.
Insane. It was like the volume of ad tech is insane, right? Because it's not just every click is viewability events, it's like engagement with the content, like how far have you scrolled, what click. So the amount of volume, just the data, it's a lot, but every data item doesn't actually have a lot of value. It's just in aggregate, it has a lot of value. But you can, and so anyway, so it was really fun to be able to capture a large part of the market, compete with Google, and that's really how I ended up in that space. It was a lucky accident to a large extent.
Well, you got to seize those. I think everything happens for a reason, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Were you,
Yeah, it
were
was a
you,
lot of fun.
were you afraid at first because you just kind of quit your grad school job, got to New York, that one didn't work out. Now you have a new one. Was there any
Yeah,
like how am I going to make a living, or is this going to
well,
fly?
it's petrifying to because I also had offers from like big companies and my friends were doing really well at like, they got hired at Google or whatever, and they're like making as a startup employee, you don't really make that much like cash, obviously, because startup and like you give up some of the cash compensation for equity. And so you definitely get to question your life when especially when you're so young and you still have student loans and you're just like, trying to, New York is super expensive. And yeah, but I was learning a lot and growing. And I was like, the opportunity to get to build a team from zero and seeing market fit was worth it for me. Just in even understanding what it takes to make something successful. Just having that experience was really eye-opening for me, and I'm still really appreciative of that.
So what can you maybe go into a little bit more detail about what you mean when you say product market fit? And then you mentioned something else right after that. You said what it takes to, I missed the last part.
Oh, what it takes to make a product successful or a company
Okay.
successful
All
from
right.
early
Well, what does it
stages.
take?
I think a lot of personal sacrifice. So yeah, so this is like I mentioned, the third time doing it, and uh, I thought it would be a lot easier this time. And so let me first answer your first question, which is I think product market fit is this weird like uh, term because it's like can are people willing to pay money for your product, and not people that your investors introduce you to or like your friends, but just people that you reach out. And it doesn't have to be. And the problem with product market fit as a term is that it doesn't really have like a really well defined space, but the gist of it is, are people willing to give you money for the product that you're building? And you sort of feel this market fit. It's you just like feel the demand for your product is growing and you sort of can't keep up. And at that point, you just like are too late to develop your go-to-market strategy, which is sort of the next step of your company. It's like, no, actually, how do I make the thing that I made scalable? I need to go hire my sales VP and my product VP and my VP of Eng and etc. But it's hard to put into words, but you'll feel it. The easiest way to frame it is, are people willing to pay you money for the product? Right? Is there enough people willing to pay you money for the product? Um, and then the second part of your question is what it takes to build something successful. This is it's the early stages. We just raised our Series A last year from GV, formerly known as Google Ventures and Lightspeed, so two top tier one investment firms in the West Coast. And so we're doing well, and I'll give you three experiences. So at Gilmo, it meant when the guy from Fast and Furious died, I think I remember I was in a casino with my sister in Connecticut because that's where she lives. And what it takes is that I had to stop what I was doing, drive to my sister's, get to an internet connection, and make sure and actually double the capacity from our ad servers, because the volume tenfolded. But being an ad tech, it meant that every news outlet connects their volume for that. And so our actually transitive volume for the ad tech was like 100x growth that one night. And so we just weren't prepared for that. For Concord, it was different. It was about, feeling that a big company like Akamai is willing to buy your company and your product because they see sort of the long-term vision. And now being the CEO is sort of sacrificing a lot. Well, I guess in coronavirus has been totally different. But you just spend so much of your life at work. And during the week, you only have time for execution. And to me, for example, on Sundays is where I meet weekly with my CEO coach and investors and whatever, just for strategic planning. And so there's really very little time right now that I have. But it gets better. And so people listening to a podcast, it's much easier. Like, once you actually have an established go-to-market, it becomes more like a normal job. But the first couple of years are really challenging, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's even interesting when you look at corporate America too. I mean, I started my own company because I spent 18 years or so traveling. So I didn't even know who my neighbor was or I didn't have any friends around because you actually have to make time for that. And since I was in different countries last 5 years, I was working in corporate America. It was on a plane for 42 hours on average a week. So it was,
my God.
Yeah. So
that is insane.
It's interesting. I mean, I think that to your point, it gets a lot easier. After you start the company, you figure out what you're going to do is going to work, and then you exactly. Scale it. It gets a lot easier. And then it's awesome to have an exit like you did as well, but now you're building another one. So when you say personal sacrifice, what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's related to what you said about not having a lot of time for friends. And my friends, I'm lucky in that I'm not really good at following up with people, but the friends I've managed to keep over a long time have a similar personality where it's okay if we don't speak for 12 months. And if I meet up with them, it's like we've seen each other, every week for the last 10 years. And so I think it's forced me to optimize for different things. So more like long-term relationships, people that are comfortable with the time that I can spend in that relationship. And so I think but looking back, I haven't spent as much time as I wish I could with some of my family members and parties and things. I've often just had to travel between the East and the West Coast to attend meetings, and you just miss part of life that a lot of your friends don't have to. Everyone has at least through Instagram and Facebook, everyone is always having a good time, and so I think you miss a big part of that. And I think you have to be okay with that. It's just sort of the reality. I know that there are exceptions, and so if you happen to have an exceptional company with let's say 4 co-founders and you hit the jackpot or whatever, if you're just collecting gold, you happen to be in an industry where people are just throwing money at you. I do know that there are examples where people don't have to make as many personal sacrifices, but I would say that's the exception and not the norm. I think to get something, just something, because they didn't exist. All of the technologies that I built, I literally designed it. They were. It's not just like an incremental improvement. They're often things that people haven't thought of or haven't built it, and they don't exist for a reason. Because if it was easy, then it would be built. And so it just takes a lot of, I think, personal time and just, I think prioritizing what matters to you at that point in life. And so I don't think is the right fit for a lot of people, but I'm happy with kind of those choices, and I'm okay making those sacrifices.
Yeah, I understand. It was really interesting. You were talking about not seeing a friend for a year, and then when you see them, it's just like yesterday you saw them, and everything clicks. It's so funny because people will text me, and my email's a black hole, so that's just ridiculous. And thank God for my team because they take care of some of my email for me. But but I had someone text me. And I didn't text back for 6 hours or whatever amount of time, but because I was in back-to-back meetings all that time, and I have do not disturb on. And I pin my team to the top so that nothing else. If they need me, then I have to make sure that I can respond. But it's just so interesting when you have people who just don't understand that. If I don't respond for 6 hours, it's because I'm busy.
Yeah, and honestly, 6 hours is a short time. I mean, sometimes it'll take me multiple weeks to get back to people.
Sometimes that's me too. Yeah.
Yeah, and my wife is worse. It'll be 3 months later, and she's like, ha ha ha, and you're just like, what? I have no context for the reply of this email, of this text. Yeah, it's good when you have friends I mean, I think you need that kind of support system, and that's something that is not spoken enough. It's what is the support system that you need in your life to help you be more successful? And it's definitely changed before getting married and now that I'm married. It's sort of the dynamics are different, and I would say my personal support system has been equally as important as other business support system that I've had. So anyways, that's just the one comment.
That's very good. Yeah, I'm like with you too. I think I'm making up for the parties though, because I didn't go to even one party in college. I went if you even take I went to a party for 15 minutes. It might have been 30 minutes, but 15 to 30 minutes, something in that range. And I was like, this is a waste of time. I have studying to do. I have my 3 jobs,
Yeah, I was the research assistant too, and so I was like trying to publish paper, and a lot of the research kids are like this too, or pre-med too. People that are in like sort of very competitive fields are like this. But I was taking like 21 credits, and I was just trying to publish a paper because I wanted to be a scientist, and I did, and it was undergrad, and I was really happy that I managed to publish a paper in like a top journal, being an undergrad, and then anyways, I gave that all up. But my undergrad was very similar to yours. I was always just so focused, and so I guess in part maybe thinking out loud it's personality. Like I've been okay, being focused on the things that I find enjoyable, and I guess work has been a large part of place of satisfaction for me.
Well, we have similar backgrounds because I wanted to get my first thesis published before in undergrad, and I did. So that was pretty cool. It was
That's amazing.
It was called "Why Do Women Choose Lower Wages?"
That's an awesome thesis.
Yeah. Well, it was really funny because I did my thesis with this guy named Bob Bushell, and he wrote a book on the wage gap. And I didn't agree with it. So I basically begged him to be the thesis advisor. So I did that thesis at Smith. Smith is an all-women's college, one of the 7 sisters. But it was a pretty funny one to get published in the top economics journal at that.
That's amazing. Wow.
It's like a first 1 semester thesis.
That's a good advisor to get, because he'll battle you, and I feel like you need that challenge to grow, because otherwise then like you get your way, and I think you need that kind of balance in your life. People are like, are you really doing these things, or are you like, you just surround yourself with like yes people versus people that actually help you grow.
Yes, I agree. So so just going back to your company, and congratulations with your company that you sold to Alchemy. My gosh, it's awesome. What could you explain? Like a lot of people have really difficulty raising money. So it sounds like you had a much less of a difficult time, but could you explain to the audience, how you go about that process, and how you create the relationships with the investors?
Yeah, I think today is actually totally different than even in 2019. Like 2021 is a year where I think people don't reach out to investors nowadays, depending on I guess where you are. I do have to say that location has mattered for a really long time in getting investment. Like when I started Concord, we were just 3 kids from Brooklyn, literally working out of a warehouse in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, New York, and it was what we could afford. We just like were working out of our savings, and we were working at a startup before, so we knew what had to get done to get to the next level. But it was really hard. They knew the companies that we had worked for. Shinji had worked at Facebook, and Cole had worked at Codecademy. I had worked at Yilma, which had a good investor network in New York City. And so that helped. People knew about us, and the investors that we wanted knew about us because we were early employees at these companies. And so I don't know in general how, like, without knowing context, I think it's hard to advise, but I can share my experience. And so with Concord, it was about, being part of some successes for other investors that really helped.
Sorry, could you repeat that part? Could you repeat that part?
For Concord, it was about being part of companies that were a success for some investors. And then when you're part of a success, they want to talk to you because you made them money, really. I mean, that's kind of what comes down to it. And for Vectorized and Redpanda, when I started this company, I had a little bit of funds left from my previous company. And so I just started the team. I believed in this idea so much. So I was like, I'm just going to build this company. Investors can come or not come. This needs to be built, and I was excited about it. And so I hired an initial small team. And so by the time I started taking calls and getting introductions, I wasn't really sure whether I wanted this to be a lifestyle business or another high growth sort of venture backed company. And it sort of changed when I got a call from a friend from a big company, and they're like, "Oh, I'll give you $3 million if you can deliver on your product by the end of the year." I was like, "This is definitely, I can't do it. My team can't do it. We don't have, and I need like to double the size of the team to be able to deliver on something like this." And so that's when I decided, that's when I decided to be a venture-backed company. And then at that time, I had a lot of kind of opportunity because I had a product, I had a team, I had people that wanted to give us money. I know it's different, and in today's market in 2021, people are racing on ideas, even first-time founders, as long as they come from good companies, I think. So I don't know if there is I don't know, a cookbook or a recipe to say, like, if you come from a top company, therefore you get an investment, because that's not how it works. But I do think it helps. Sadly, location has also been, at least historically, influential. When I moved to San Francisco, it was a totally different market than even New York City for the type of infrastructure companies that I like to build. And so I don't know how that's changed so much, for at least for the city stage. I think that it still matters. I think for the growth stages of companies, I don't think it matters as much anymore.
Okay. Well, so why doesn't it matter as much for growth stage companies?
Yeah, I think so. I think COVID has changed things fundamentally. I'm part of Lightspeed, like I mentioned, and they just released a study where about 50% or something really large of the companies post-pandemic will always have a remote workforce component. Kind of like structurally, they're changing this. And so I think for city stage, the face-to-face, even in the pandemic, I've still met people like socially distant we'll go on Park Presidio here in San Francisco for walks, and like 6 feet apart, and we're wearing our masks. But that still matters, I think, for early stage companies, or it did for me. I think everyone has this, like, if your family has connections, it's totally different. But if you come from nothing, I didn't grow up with money. And so for me, it did make a big difference coming here in having choice and meeting the right people. And, there's sort of perception too about your company and how serious you are, depending on the location of where the headquarters are. It's this whole weird market dynamics. So I think it matters for seed stage. And then for growth, it's more like, well, is your company making money? What's like the projected annual recurring revenue? You become more numerical. And so people have a sense of understanding your business without having to, they can just, if your numbers are strong, then they'll give you money because you're likely to make them money. And I think at the seed stage, it matters because largely people are invested in you as a person and not the business as much. Their question is, can you make a business successful? And are you an expert? And are you the right team? And if you can answer those 3 questions, then I think you're likely to have funding at the seed stage. But it's never about the product. It's about them believing that you have what it takes to figure out how to make whatever that you're thinking a product, or pivot in ways that will make it a business. And for growth stage, it's really just about numbers. Like, are you hitting your ARRs? How's your recruit? Can you recruit top people? What is your churn rate for your customers, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. So, so I guess your reputation precedes you, and you are an expert. You know how to build the right team, and you have the grit to make something successful.
Thank you. I'm still trying. We're still early in this company journey, and so hopefully my next goal will be to take a company IPO, and I'm excited to see if I can actually get there.
So, what do you think the other silver linings are? I would think that, going back to location, that given we all are comfortable with Zoom these days, that maybe investors wouldn't be as sensitive to location. What do you think? You think it really matters a lot?
Yeah, it's changing, and let me think for a second. So from personal experience, I think there were the big cities, right? Berlin, New York, San Francisco, just like tech hubs where it mattered for you to be present. But there was this trend, this like quiet trend that was happening. Even when I was at Akamai, Red Hat has been super successful at building this remote thing. And what has changed is that people have now realized that you can build a successful company with remote teams But if you actually look outside of these big centers of technology, that people have been working remote for a really, really long time, right? Like people in the UK have worked for US companies in Poland, in Germany, basically, Russia, etc. All of these places have fantastic technologies. I hire a lot from Colombia because I'm originally from Colombia and I have connections there, and I love to participate in making our workforce a little bit more diverse than a bunch of white people that are, especially in the developer world. I think it's important to work on diversity early on. Anyways, long story short is I think there were these technological hubs in these big cities, and then over time, people realized you can now build something successful. And so I was just on a reference call this morning for someone who migrated from Russia to Berlin, or actually a different part, a smaller town in Germany, who's raising capital from 2 investors in San Francisco. And so I think that's 2021. I think that's going to become more and more the norm. And his valuation and his post-money valuation, he's raising a seed at like $19 million post-money valuation. So like, just, really fantastic company with really fun, and it's out of an open source project. And so I think that trend is going to continue, where investors are going to simply start to fund really the best ideas, and not on paper the best ideas because you happen to be in San Francisco and I live in Palo Alto, but truly like worldwide the best ideas.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, you get advantage. Those investors from San Francisco can take advantage of companies that don't have to pay as much, for example, for manufacturing or what have you, because they can take advantage of the lower cost of living, and also perhaps the lower cost of paying people, and then the investors win as well as the startups.
And I think people in early stage startups should really over-index on people, especially early on, and I think should be okay to overpay both in equity and in salary for people. I know it seems very expensive to perhaps spend, I don't know, let's say like $200,000 base salary for an engineer with like, a couple of points of equity. But what has tended to happen is that those really great people always have a network. It's not, they don't exist in isolation. They're, they have friends from previous companies, and they'll start to attract fantastic humans. And so some of our earlier employees, we have 30 people, and we have 1 person that we recruited through a recruiting agency.
Wow.
Everyone else has been just word of mouth. Even, my VP of engineer who's starting next month, my VP of sales, my head of solutions engineering, both of my chief architects, it's just been people that I knew that they're like, oh, you should work with Alex. And I think it came about because we're generous with early on compensation for the people that joined us. And they're like, I want you to be part of our success as well. They feel sort of more vested. And so what happens is then in the remote world, it does make a big difference, especially in the scaling up phase. If now that we have like remote offices, quote unquote, like what is that? But we have these hubs in like Colombia, in Mexico, in Krakow, in Warsaw, in the UK, in like Russia, in anyways, all these places, they start to ask their friends, it's like, hey, do you want to work for me? So I think it's critical early on because good people will bring good people. But also if you start remote, you actually start to develop these hubs. And so you start to pull away from a much bigger audience than you could otherwise if you were just being an in-person company.
Yes, I agree. I love that, over-index on people. I haven't heard that term before. I love it. And I think I agree. I mean, my 2 right-hand guys are amazing, and I couldn't imagine not having them. So is there anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with today about how to be a successful entrepreneur?
I think, over-index on people, and the second part to that is then culture. And so I think just to dive a little deeper on people, especially for people that are just building their first company, is that it goes through and through, whether you're choosing investors or you're choosing early employees. I think this is as an early stage company, you now have choice because there's a lot of money, especially from some of these early exits. There's this idea of super angels, which are early employees at some of these early successes from Facebook and, now Snowflake and so on that are coming out with early IPOs. Those people will have money to influence the next wave of startups. And so over-indexing on like your personality fit with these other people in a way that it complements you, I think on the investment front, on the employees we talked about, and then the last one is culture. And so we were 6 people when, as a group, we decided to come up with what our cultural values are. And out of that came out this really cool program, which is a scholarship for women, Black and Latino people that are actually any minority. But it so happens that those are the people that we attract. And it's really cool in that we've gotten to help people that wouldn't otherwise be in tech. So right now we're helping this woman in the UK, and we just give them money. And every week they meet with us. We are experts in what we do. And so we help them evolve their technical thinking, get into tech, and we give them a monthly stipend. We expect nothing from them. No IP, no ideas, no output expectations. They could sit on the couch for 4 weeks and still get their monthly stipend. If they do nothing, that's on us for choosing a bad scholarship recipient. Most of our scholarship recipients are actually fantastic people that just need a little bit of a break from their day-to-day lives to get into tech. And so, it mattered to the team, that the founding team and some of the earlier employees to help the world be a little bit of a better place. And so I think that's something that was really cool that came out of that brainstorming of over-indexing on people and a culture of sort of inclusivity and diversity and trying to make the world a little better place.
That's wonderful. I'm just taking some notes. So that's really cool. So how many rounds have you been with this scholarship?
Just so far 2, and we're really picky with the people that we choose. Mostly we really want to help the people that we think we can make the biggest impact for them. So it's not just incremental impact, but whether so it's one person that had a learning. She was this person was partially autistic, and we were. They got comfortable with the mentorship team. And so we can really help them advance mentally as an engineer, transition from a non-engineer into an engineering role. There's another kid from a South African country who he was from Tunisia, and not South Africa, yeah. So he was from Tunisia. And, for him was having access to just school tech. Right? Like a lot of the technology that gets outsourced to Tunisia was like QA and just mindless, boring thing. But here's this super talented physicist who writes C++ and it's like 20 years old. I was like, wow. I want to help you. I can help you sort of, we just give him money and we expect nothing. And so for them, it's awesome. They get to work with a cool team. And I think what's perhaps the most impactful that all of our scholarship recipients don't really understand is that we bring them into our network. And when they're looking for a job, we'll be like, oh, I worked with them. They did this internship project, and we can talk intelligently about who they are. And so, we'll see. It's still an experiment. I don't know of any other company that is doing this, especially startup. We take one scholarship recipient at a time, and they speak with all of our best talent, literally my entire executive team and my chief architects on the engineering side. So they get the best people that I could potentially recruit to help them forever. And so, I don't know, it's an experiment. We'll see where this social experiment turns out. And
I love it. Well,
yeah.
So what happened with the first one that you had? I mean, you did it for a year. What's going on with them now?
Yeah, so they're back in grad school, he decided to keep studying physics, which it's great. He's now tackling sort of much more ambitious projects, and it's been so early. I think this is kind of like a 10-year journey where we just get to learn with them. The woman we're helping now, I'm really excited. I do think that this is from selecting the candidate, she's much better fit for the kind of influence that we can have on her. And honestly, we haven't done this long enough to really have like big lessons learned so far. It's more, this is an area where we think it's cool, it's new, we can help. It's because we want to be a positive impact in the world. So we'll see. I think for her, we really have moved her way of thinking in tackling problems she didn't even know were possible, like starting a company or competing with another $5 billion competitor, which is the size of our competitor. And it's just like, these are the things that you can do. And so, for them, it's really just having a one-on-one chat about just whatever they want to chat.
That's nice. It's inspiring. Very good. Well, I got to tell you, you gave us a lot of very great points for the startups today. I just wanted to kind of summarize some of the key points. I loved what you were talking about with regards to interviewing the customers. So you looked at a kind of a broad range of customers, and to help you identify what the product market fit would be, and to make sure that people would be willing to pay money for your product. And we were talking about what makes a startup successful, and you mentioned personal sacrifice, not going to parties, having a good support system. And I have lots and lots of stories where I had to run back to some network connection and fix something as well. So, I was like, oh my gosh, this email came in. I can't do it. I can't text all the answers on my phone or whatever it is. And then location matters when raising capital. You mentioned San Francisco, New York, and you actually mentioned Berlin as well, which is interesting. And then investing, why do people invest? And you mentioned, people invest as you as a person, or do you have the right expertise? Or can you create the right team? Do you have the grit to make something successful? I'm using that term, but that's kind of what you're talking about. Exactly. And you're talking also about the people who've worked remote for a long time. So my whole company's been remote for 9 years. So and pretty much, I look at my life, and after Goldman Sachs, where I was on the floor of the exchange most of the time, I was always remote because I was traveling 100% of the time. So, it's so interesting when the pandemic hit, I was so surprised about how people, it was really impactful for people to be remote. But I think now people are very comfortable with it. I think that going the other way is going to be harder for people. But I really, really loved a couple of these last points you mentioned about over-indexing on people. Fantastic human beings will attract other fantastic human beings, and looking for the personality fit. And then lastly, culture, and building a culture that everyone gets around, and doing creating some interesting programs that people can all participate in and engage with. So I really enjoyed this talk today, and I think that everybody listening and will listen to it will also enjoy it. So thank you so much, Alex, for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks, Rosemary.
The only last thing I'll mention is, if you know of any other companies that need to raise money, we have a platform we've established called Ignite Social Impact. Okay. And companies can raise up to $5 million. And it's a first crowd equity platform focused on social impact type companies. We've launched about 335 companies the last 6 years. Yeah, and 50% of them are co-founded by women, and 60% are co-founded by minorities. And there's 70% living rate. So I mentioned that as well, because we're really trying to cater to people who gaining access to capital is challenging. For only 3% of the capital goes to women founded companies, minority founded companies. So thank you again, Alex, for everything, and have a great day.